Okay, so this is the NSF project that we were alluding to that I've had the great fortune to work with my fellow panelists on, and we have a short video on this. Let me see if I can play it.
Water shortages and droughts are increasingly common in California and worldwide. Currently, 85% of fresh water is used for agriculture, and much of that is lost by overwatering. Our goal is to conserve water with precision irrigation at the plant level. Recent advances in infrared sensing and UAVs now make it possible to monitor conditions from the air to identify plants that are receiving too much or too little water. A key challenge is how to close the loop, adjusting the flow of water at the plant level in response to this data. One approach is to use electronic valves. However, these are prohibitively expensive and prone to failures. A new research project funded by USDA grant will explore an alternative: rapid, robot-assisted precision irrigation delivery, where portable devices will adjust low-cost passive valves that cost far less than electronic valves. The rapid system will employ the innate skills of human workers for locomotion and dexterity. GPS and RFID wireless technology will identify which valves to adjust and by what amount, based on data and weather predictions, to direct human workers to which valves need adjustment. The project will design, prototype, and evaluate the rapid system and investigate how mobile robots can be included to facilitate valve adjustment.
So this was the idea that we were alluding to about cost and just having these very passive emitters, which are a few pennies, available for a few pennies for irrigation, for drip irrigation. And the idea was to be able to adjust the emitter settings for each at the plant level. So this was the prototype that was just mentioned. There was a device that we prototyped that farmer assistants or agriculture workers could carry around, and they'd be alerted by a GPS system to make the adjustments that were appropriate to that particular plant. The good news here is that we did experiments. We applied for a patent on this. Okay, sorry about that. So really quickly, I don't have any more sound on the videos, but this also, as we started doing this work, I was reminded of a project that we did now some 25 years ago, something called the Telegarden, where we set up a robot in the center of a living garden, and we invited anyone in the world to access it from the internet. And we didn't know if this was going to be of interest, if anybody would want to do this, but it turned out it was hugely successful. We had hugely popular. We had thousands and then tens of thousands of people coming in to help us tend the garden. It was available 24 hours a day. And so we recently decided in this new context to revisit that project and look at a very different problem, which is could that be fully automated? Could we actually use advances in deep learning and AI to take the human out of the loop? And so this is a project that we called it Alpha Garden. And the idea here is to explore, in particular, polyculture. And we've talked today quite a bit about agriculture at large scales, and most of that is, as you know, is monoculture. We try to keep the plants separated by type and separated from each other. In polyculture, it's just the opposite. There's a lot of diverse plants that are put in close proximity, and then the advantages are that they can often they can have benefits in terms of reduction in pesticides and herbicides and more resilient, robust growth, but and reduction in water usage. But at the same time, there's a huge amount of increased labor required to maintain them because the plants will tend to overgrow. So in a nutshell, this is a project that my student Yahav Abigal has been leading with the team in my lab. And we set out a reward function that was a combination for this test bed of optimizing coverage, the amount of leaf coverage, diversity, the diversity of different plants being grown, and the sustainability, how much water was saved over a baseline amount. And so we set up a system. We used the Farmbot hardware that's available, and I should give a quick shout out to them. They're a great company based in down in San Luis Obispo. And we set this up in the Berkeley greenhouse. And so we've, in fact, we also consider it an interesting art project. I can say more about that later, but it was included in an art exhibition in New York just before the pandemic. And we just reported the results in a paper that Yahag presented in remotely to a conference in Hong Kong, and on using a simulator to tune the parameters of a controller. And the simulator, I'll just illustrate this. The idea is that, as I mentioned earlier, the time constants are so long for agriculture that to essentially learn by observation, we would have to, essentially observe months or years of growth. So what we've done is built a simulator that can essentially accelerate that by a factor of 100,000. And it is, what you're seeing here, the red is our pruning events. And then we can try different policies, different policies with different parameters. And we run these forward. We also are working to tune the simulator to the to the actual plant performance. So we have run one growth of the garden, which is this here. I'll show the video. And the reason I want to show this is this was a time lapse. We shot it every night, starting in fact, on January 1st is when we planted seeds. We randomly scattered 11 different edible herbs and herbs in this garden. It's 3 feet by 3 meters by 1.5 meters. And so you're watching right now the time lapse as it unfolded. This is about late February or so. And as you can see, it gets quite overgrown. And essentially this is where the robot should come in and actually start to edit this. The irrigation, the pruning system wasn't working at this time, so we were doing some of this by hand. But here's where it got really interesting. Right about here is when COVID-19 struck, and we were told that we can no longer access the greenhouse. So what you're going to see in the last sequence here is the system basically going through a cycle where it's been denied water. And so we had to shut the system down, but we had the camera still on. And so right now it's suddenly going through this sort of last phase, or almost like last gasp, where it's essentially trying to flower, to create attention. It's reaching out for desperately for something. And these are these flowers that we didn't remember planting in there. All kinds of things were happening, and to some degree, it almost to my mind was like it's almost like Picasso's Guernica. That this thing is, you're watching the death spiral of this polyculture garden. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we can take a few more questions if we have time. Oh, wait, I'm not hearing. Yes. Oh, there we go. Yeah.
And I can see one question is around, are you using deep reinforcement learning to tackle AlphaGarden? I'll search for some of the others.
Oh, good, thank you. And I didn't get to present that, and some of this is in the paper. We did some exploratory work, not using reinforcement learning, but imitation learning. And we were able to take examples from the simulator and use those to train a system that also ran on a novel simulation environment. And we found that it actually worked surprisingly well, better than I thought it was. And so this is essentially a supervised learning approach. It's just looking at examples and determining the next action. In other words, where to irrigate or prune. But the next step is to apply an RL method, which can look further ahead, can develop a policy. And in fact, we're going to use an MPC type of policy initially, but that is exactly the motivation for the next phase, where we're now going to be replanting the garden in approximately a week. And we'll be collecting new data and then comparing it to the simulation results in parallel. We're actually going to divide the garden in half and have 2 plantings where we control where the seed locations go. So hopefully I can report on this in the future. And if you're curious about it, please go to alphagarden.org. We're keeping a website on the project there.
Wonderful, and perhaps we have time to squeeze in a question around the image stack as well. Taking a couple of the questions from previous and during this session. Firstly, are the current solutions for image capture off the shelf? Are they Is that providing the best, or do you have to use custom image processing and custom image stacks, or is off the shelf fine? And where are the biggest challenges with image recognition and processing?
So Stefano, maybe I'll let you take that. One thing I'll just point out is that the OpenCV, there is something called Plant CV, Plant Computer Vision. It's an open library that is being used for genotyping, and we found it very helpful. Stefano?
I tend to agree. I think that the system we have put together is just a position of existing pieces out there. That is, I think, perhaps way more than we know. It's a very active environment. And maybe it's also due to my ignorance. I'm not a perception person, so perhaps I'm not so sophisticated to identify the limitations on what we're doing. But most of it, for what we've been doing, we've been putting together off-the-shelf components. Maybe the composition was a bit of a tweak, but we didn't really have to go into deep development of the perception pipeline. It was mostly kind of reusing things.
But it is a really active area of research, this idea of plant phenotyping. As many people are looking at these systems for being able to very quickly monitor leaf growth and possible decay or deterioration. So there's a lot of computer vision advances can be applied fairly directly. So I encourage you to look at Plant CV. It's got a great set of baseline tools.
That's fantastic.
Okay.
I just put that into the chat as well, and we'll try to follow up with any questions that people post there. And I would like to thank you, Ken, for moderating a great panel. Thank you, Stavros, Stefano, Joshua. It's been a lot of information, and it's fascinating to realize just how much of it is happening here. I was stunned to discover that the tomato harvester was developed by roboticists in the 60s from UC Davis, I believe. And now look at the work that's happening, and we're really in the hotbed for, the center of agricultural research in not just the US. So thank you very much for sharing.